Hello and welcome to the Gardner Innovation Search Partners podcast. On this show, we sit down with the brilliant minds guiding the amazing work being performed at universities across the globe. I'm your host, Quentin Thomas, and today I'm excited to be here with Dr. Serenity Wright, Senior Executive Director for Innovation, Community Health, and Societal Impact at the University of Kentucky, and Jordana Armstrong, Strategic Advisor for Social Innovation at the University of Maryland Ventures. I'm excited to talk to them about social innovation and how we think about impact. Serenity and Jordana, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so to kick things off, how do each of you define social innovation in the context of the work with universities? And Serenity, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Quentin. For the University of Kentucky, we define social innovation as activities, initiatives, solutions for sustained societal impact. And we're specifically looking for solutions that are created, co-designed with the community that they are meant to serve.
Yeah, and what about you, Jordana?
I always appreciate when Serenity answers this question first because it's so succinct at Kentucky and I love it. I think what I would add is that it's important from an institutional perspective to just understand what social innovation means on your campus and then to come up with something that aligns both to what the objectives of the researchers are trying to achieve and the capacity you have within your institution. So the at the University of Calgary, where I was formerly, we spent about a year going through a long concept analysis to understand really like what are the components of social innovation. And we found that 84% of papers that were reviewed, that was about over 1,000 papers reviewed. And thank you, Karen Benzies, for leading that work. Social need was incredibly important. There's an innovative aspect, much like the novel technologies we're looking for in STEM. Implementation and execution is critical. Improvement, so there's some kind of improvement. And then as Serenity articulates, that relationship and collaboration is critical. So at the University of Calgary, we define social innovation as the intentional implementation of an initiative to address a social need that is enabled through collaborative action, leading to new or improved relationships and capabilities that are more effective, efficient, just, and sustainable. Beautiful definition, quite a mouthful. So ultimately, I like to think about social innovation as the pursuit of trying to solve a social problem at a systemic level and leveraging, just like we do in any entrepreneurship space, leveraging the resources and capabilities that we have at our disposal to make that happen. A little bit of a mouthful, but I think social innovation is defined in a lot of different ways, and it's important to be able to define it for your institution.
Yeah. Do you each think that different institutions might find different ways to define it themselves, or would you encourage institutions to find different ways to define it themselves?
I would say be honest and aspirational, right? And Jordana's piece about context is really important, right? And that's what I was over here scribbling notes about, because I think you have to be mindful about how the context for social innovation can and should fit inside your university, right? And it's very common for universities want to benchmark and then match or mirror. And that's actually not going to work if it doesn't fit for the faculty and your mission and your context within your community, right? So being honest and aspirational about your goals and your aims and what you're trying to do through social innovation is really important in order for adoption, scale, and impact, right? Without that, it's just going to be a program and it's actually not going to lead to impact.
And I think the piece I would add there is specifically when we were at the University of Calgary and even at the University of Maryland, don't be afraid for social innovation to just, at this state of starting your initiatives, be the other stuff. We don't want to, as Serenity says, we need it to be aspirational. We want to really be mindful of how faculty perceive their work. But a lot of tech transfer offices do start with this is coming out of the social sciences, humanities, arts, and we don't know what to do with it. And that's an okay place to be as well when you're getting started.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so it's not a big deal if it's not this huge program right out the gate. You can get started simply and then scale from there. I like that. So talking about universities getting started with social innovation, why is it important anyway for research universities to prioritize social innovation, particularly now when budgets are getting tighter and tighter?
So I would say first, most strategic plans I've looked at speak to that sort of third mission of the university, community impact. How is the university driving that impact? And we know, there's a particular context in the US right now. There's a bit of an identity crisis for universities from my perspective. And so social innovation is a really critical and strategic lever to be able to pull on in order to continue to develop good relationships in community, build a productive reputation, and really put your money where your mouth is in terms of the actions you're able to take with and alongside community to bolster that reputation. From a very traditional tech transfer perspective, the cost of intellectual property assets typically related to these types of innovations is often free. Copyrights, trademarks are inherent, and so your cost of IP proportional to the revenue potential gives you a nice ratio. And also time to market. Time to market for a lot of these innovations is much quicker. And so if you are looking for those traditional metrics in a time when budgets are getting tighter and you're trying to kind of rationalize why these activities exist, social innovation, exploring those opportunities, I think is a really strong pathway.
Great. And Dr. Wright?
Yeah, I agree with everything Jordana said. So would just add contextually, she mentioned copyright and trademark and those types of things. And I think that's important for community engagement, right? And effectuating the impact of this work in community, because what we often don't think about, both from a tech transfer side and a faculty research side, is as we put these things out in the world and we're just offering them for free or just doing them, or maybe doing them through an MOU, there's actually no protection for the integrity and the fidelity of the thing. So in partnering with the Tech Transfer Office, we're actually effectuating the impact of these important community-based programs, initiatives, and solutions, right? So it's not just about numbers for the office, or it's not just about scaling, right? We don't even talk about commercialization when we're working with our community impact, community engaged faculty, because sometimes they just hear monetization, and it's because it's not about that. It's about effectuating the impact. And in order to do that, we have to protect the integrity and the fidelity of that work so that we truly get at community impact, so that we truly get at the critical piece of the research-backed, evidence-based work that's going out into the world. And as she said, it costs nothing. It can still cost nothing, right? But the return on impact will be so much higher in partnering with that tech transfer office for protection of these solutions.
Yeah. I heard you say a different kind of ROI there, return on impact as opposed to return on investment. So both of you are talking about in the context of tech transfer offices. For the audience to have some context, where does each of your role fit in the midst of that research enterprise within the university? And I'll start with Jordana.
Sure. So my role within universities has been situated either in the tech transfer office or in the broader sort of entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. And when I think about my role from a tech transfer perspective, one stark difference with my colleagues is that I'm working with faculty very, very, very early because there are a lot of things in working with community that need to be considered around what kind of intellectual property is actually created and who's contributing at various stages. In particular with copyright, that can be a little bit tricky if someone's getting involved with editing a program manual. But even more importantly than that, working with faculty quite early to have them think about the so what if the research happens to produce the type of outcomes that they're looking for. There's demonstrated efficacy in reducing youth gang violence statistics in a particular community. So the so what of how can this community partner that you've collaborated with to develop the research, what are the types of materials or what do they need to actually operationalize this program going forward? It's not always the same types of materials or protocols that are required for the research. And so the earlier that I can work with those faculty members and researchers to help them think about the so what and those possibilities, I think the better. So to answer your question, Quentin, I think early and often is how I'm situated when I'm working with faculty. But then, in the traditional entrepreneurial sector, it's not so different. When I was managing the investment fund, we were working with faculty through due diligence and similar vein, actually. We do like to say early and often is an appropriate form of engagement. But at that stage, they have a company, they've founded something. And then in terms of, operating in the broader tech transfer office or entrepreneurial ecosystem, I'm a actor very similar to the rest of my colleagues. And I think sometimes we think about the social innovation work as incredibly different. And there are a lot of differences that I think we'll get into in terms of language and some other things. But there are also a lot of similarities and parallels. I use very similar skill set to my colleagues in terms of project management, network development, helping analyze and identify pathways in terms of reaching the type of audience you want to reach. I leverage a lot of the same resources as well. So bringing in expert advisors, trying to connect with different forms of capital that can move the innovation forward. So, there's there can be a nuance in how you do this work, but I don't want to discount the strong parallels and how many tech transfer professionals can apply their current skills to work across multiple different faculties.
Awesome. Yeah. And Dr. Wright?
Yeah. So my team, our social innovation team, sits inside of a broader UK Innovate structure, which is part of the research enterprise at the University of Kentucky. We are the innovation and economic development arm for the university. So I often describe it as like we're our own functioning startup, right? Other than athletics, we have to be revenue generating. But inside of UK Innovate, and as Jordana said, unlike a lot of traditional tech transfer office structures, my team doesn't sit inside of our technology commercialization office. We run in parallel. We work in tandem with them, along with a couple other units inside of this broader UK Innovate umbrella. And I think that's important because it's about the mission of the work, right? As Jordana framed, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of transfer from skill sets, right? And purpose, but our mission is a little bit different in that we still operate from a traditional tech transfer metrics perspective. I'm still looking for disclosures. We're still looking for number of licenses. We're still looking for all these activity metrics. But for us, that's a baseline, right, of just activity. What we're really looking for is that impact piece, right? Why are we doing it? How is it making a difference? And what is happening? And by separating us, it gives us a little bit more freedom around how we are situated in the university and how we work with our innovators. It makes things a little bit more difficult when we're asked for things like, can you show us your deal sheet? Well, that doesn't apply to me because I don't write my own contracts, right? We have a whole separate contracts team. We're not a cradle to grave office. So I'm not going to take credit for somebody else's work, right? So when traditional tech transfer offices are trying to find ways to make this work inside of their own context, we always have to start there. I always have to start there in that conversation when I'm working with them because the context is not the same. And I have to be very overt about that so that they understand why it's different. And so for us, even though we sit inside of UK Innovate and we're supposed to be the economic development arm, the thing that I've appreciated most from beginning about the vision is that we were always told measure based on return on impact. So my business hypothesis was, well, if I can focus on the people and prove that it's the individuals that matter, the human connectedness that matters, we will then actually get to return on investment, right? And we have proven that thesis to be true. But being able to be structurally separate, but partnered with, right? I hang on very closely. Anybody who's ever heard me talk in the last 3 years, it's my IP guy. And I don't go anywhere without him. That, because that piece is so critical, right? And that is the strongest arm for us as a social innovation team, is to our tech transfer office. And I hug them very tightly and refuse to let go.
I love it. I love it. And I also love what you're talking about. And I think setting that context of where your roles sit is really important for the audience, because the way you talk about Dr. Wright, being a separate entity, your team, yet you partner closely with, those other divisions in research. I think that's a good thing for people to know, because it does open up more of that flexibility. And Jordana, what you're talking about of approaching them early and often, it really relates to something that was talked about in the previous episode with Paul Corson at University of Texas, where he was talking about the importance of the researchers knowing, and that they would love to know, what are the things that will really make an impact? What are the things that people are really looking for, as opposed to they get the funding, they work on this, and then it gets to the tech transfer office and it's like, well, there's not really a market for it, but it's cool research. So I love that, and it's kind of bridging the gap between a couple episodes right here too.
I do just want to add, because I don't think I articulated specifically the structure, and I want to point it out because I think part of this discussion is about supporting other offices who might be interested in engaging in this type of work. And Serenity and I have had the opportunity to talk many times, and I've actually never specifically understood that distinction. So I think it's really important to highlight, at the University of Maryland, it's strategically important that this work stay aligned internal to the tech transfer office, and for me to figure out pathways to bring social innovators into the existing infrastructure. And that's because of the stage of development of where this initiative is at. And so I just thought it was important to point out that contrast from a structural perspective, because I think it really, really well highlights the point that Serenity made earlier, which is your local context really matters. And so just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, so super important here, because we've talked about evolution and how to do that. Quentin, you specifically asked, so it's okay, right, for it to look different at the baby phase or at the introduction phase, however we want to frame it. And I did start inside of the tech transfer office. When I first came to this office over 3.5 years ago, we started inside of our tech transfer office. And just in the last year, then shifted to our own, and for exactly what Jordana has highlighted, right? And I think it's important to note the evolution, right? And to note the different phases and why we did that. Because what she just said because of the phase that the program is at and how we're trying to get them to understand the value that the office has to offer across campus, it's important that she is situated inside of tech transfer. And that's where we started too. And then as we grew and generated income, I was going to try and avoid that, but the frank reality of it is we made money, we did well, and now we have the opportunity to scale and grow broader. And so that now because the infrastructure has already been built, right? That foundation is already there. Now we can grow into these two separate and strong pillars, and now support up, right? And I wasn't really thinking about it when we were talking about the evolution before. And so I think it's just important for me to high five Jordana right here, right now, to this is how we're showing the evolution of this whole program development process.
One more highlight in evolution, which I think is fantastic, and Serenity, I wish we had these conversations more often. At the University of Calgary specifically, we started in the tech transfer office. In our evolution, we weren't successful in figuring out licensing in the way that they've been able to do that in Kentucky. And we actually evolved to create sort of like a startup environment. So we ended up with a innovation hub that served social entrepreneurs, which included researchers as social entrepreneurs, and an investment fund. But startups were really what were being incentivized at the University of Calgary, and where we were focusing all across disciplines. And so again, it's a nice parallel of just the way that the journey can look very, very different, and success will end up looking different in terms of what your institution values and what's important from a strategic perspective. High five.
That is awesome. And I really hope our audience really lets that sink in that, it started out from the very beginning, kind of, similar in the tech transfer office, but then evolved out in very different ways. So, but still, the goal is to bring these innovations that are really having social impact to the market, to people, to impact, society. So, kind of going, all right, we have this stage of how you evolved, right? Then my next question is, you know, if a university is thinking, I'm not sure, how do I bring this in? I don't know if I have the team. We just heard you talk about how to evolve different ways. I mean, what would you say to someone about implementing something like this with a limited budget and team capacity and that ability to build internal capacity collectively?
So I'll just say, like, it is possible to do a lot with a little. Um, when I joined the team, I talked we a lot. We are doing this, we are doing that. This is how we are moving forward. Here's the great work that we have done. The secret is there was no we. It was me, myself, and I, right? And just me as I worked through it. I got a lot of questions initially, especially from our internal campus, as I kind of did the internal roadshow around this is new and I'm here to help you. I'm in the tech transfer office, so I am a social scientist by training. I understand you. I hear you. Please talk to me. Like, just be my friend. Be my friend. But the question was always, well, what resources do you have? And where's your budget? And it frustrated me, right? Because I didn't need one. If I needed something, I asked for it and I got it funded, but I didn't need something. And there was this concept that I was working through, a wall that I was having to get over from our internal campus community, that if I didn't have a massive budget and a massive team, I wasn't going to be successful, or that it didn't really matter to the university, right? Well, if they don't give her a team and they don't give her a budget, we don't actually matter to the university. That's not actually important. And so what I started communicating was, the university has invested in me because they acknowledge that they haven't been investing in the infrastructure. And I am here to build the infrastructure. So help me partner with you to communicate what we need as a group in order to feel valued, in order to feel supported, in order for our research to grow in the direction that it wants to grow. And that's what started bringing people in. But it was just me and myself and my Outlook bopping around campus. The question I always get asked next then is, but then how did you do it? How did you grow so quickly, right? And I knew in the beginning, and said it as part of my interview, if we don't make a massive tidal wave on campus in the first 6 months, it's not going to go. I had to sink in the first 6 months. And so I went anywhere and everywhere. I went to every presentation. I went to every college. I went to anything that I saw that a researcher was presenting at or doing, I was there. And I followed up, right? And it wasn't ever, I'm Dr. Serenity Wright. Here's what I do. I can help you. Please talk to me. I just talked about goals and hopes and dreams. I didn't even talk about what I did. I just asked them what their research hopes and dreams were. And then I asked them what they needed to get there. And then I sat on it and waited until I could find a meaningful connection. And then I went back to them and said, I heard you. And I think this is something that could help you. Will this work? Right? And I just kept doing little things like that. And again, by myself, it didn't cost the institution anything. The first thing I spent money on was $250 on champion postcards. That's what I spent. And I took 4 researchers who had trusted me, and I spent $250 on these postcards that I just plastered all over campus. Anytime I met with anybody, I handed them out so they could see people who were doing research like them, who were being successful, and who were friends with me. At the end of the day, that is all I asked for. Like, just be my friend. Let me be your partner. Jordana talked about it. We want to be part of the journey. We want to help you along the way. We want to brainstorm with you. That's all we are doing. That's all we're doing. And so from a, how do we do it? Limited capacity, limited budget. Can we do it? One, you can't afford not to do it, right? Truly, the fact of the matter is you can't afford not to do it. But empower someone, and inspiration and empowerment are not the same. Right? Inspiration is support, the cheerleader, the pat on the back. Empowerment is the tools, the freedom to do it, the freedom to act, right? So empower someone on campus to do, right? And it will actually happen. And you don't need a ton of things. It takes a little bit of courage and some gumption and determination. Now, my IP guy will tell you, I'm just persistent enough to not care and to just get it over the finish line. But it stems from I'm going to do right by my people. And that's all it took. And again, so the investment was small. The investment was, and I'm actually 5'1", so it was a small investment, and I'm a small human. So the investment was small across the board. And we've had massive impact. So you can do a little with a lot.
Great. That's great. Yes,
I really love that story, Serenity, and similar journey. And I just want to, because it's a similar journey, I don't want to speak to that specifically, but I'll just add that if your institution is not in a position where you're able to bring a full-time person on, like we did at Innovate Calgary, or like we were able to do at Maryland, you can look at your team from a fractional perspective, but what's really, really important is if someone is going to be going out and working with faculty, and you can hear it throughout Serenity's story, you really need to listen, because what those faculty are interested in doing might be different than what we've heard traditionally in tech transfer spaces. And so, but when you listen really deeply, you can kind of cut through what feels like a difference. So, we talked earlier about, we don't use the word commercialization, but people are interested in sustainability. They are interested in ensuring that impact can be resilient and that they're not, chasing dollars just to make this happen. So I think if you really deeply listen to the researchers, you'll start to learn about what those goals and dreams are. Like Serenity talked about, like if you had $10,000, like what would this look like? If you had $5,000, what would you do? If money was no object, blue sky thinking, like where do you want to take this? And then work backwards from there. So I had actually written down listen before, and then that exactly came up in Serenity's story. But I would really encourage your teams to kind of check the ego at the door, listen very intently. Don't try to make assumptions, and also don't devalue what the potential of this could be just because A, you might not understand it, or B, you don't see the value yet. And I think that belief in faculty, like, no, I see where this is going. There can be a lot of gatekeeping in these ecosystems. And so, just being mindful that there's real possibility across all of these kinds of portfolios. And there's possibility for sustainability, and there's possibility for great impact. But we need to be attentive to kind of like I said, checking our ego at the door a little bit.
And I would like to just follow up on this a little bit, because we've kind of talked about language a little bit, and this ego piece I think is really important because it manifests in ways that I think we don't necessarily think about, right? And Jordana and I have both helped a number of universities across the U.S. and in various capacities, and one of the things that I hear often and that have heard it in my own office. I'll be honest, not from my IP guy, but from others. I want to be clear about that because of where I'm going, not my IP guy, but from others, is this language when we're talking to these researchers that it's just copyright. Well, you just have copyright. And that they mean that genuinely, right? But we're used to, as a tech transfer field, talking about patents, and provisional patents. And okay, but this is just copyright. So, and we mean it as like, it's easier, or it's not on a timeline, or it's not going to cost the university thousands of dollars, Quentin, as you pointed out earlier, to do. But what happens with the word just is it immediately puts the human-focused people on edge, right? Because and Jordana said it, we're devaluing it in saying it's just copyright. And in 3 years, I've made almost $5 million in royalty and $25 million in associated income through grants on just copyright. So it's being intentional about how our ego plays in, or how our traditional thinking plays out in all of our language, that you've really got to be careful about. It's those little things that will, Matt and I talk about, we play Battleship. That's how we conceptually work through the day, right? So that'll sink your battleship so fast. I mean, like E7 direct hit if you're not intentional about your language, because your social scientists, humanities, community health practitioners, anybody who focuses on people, those are the words that they're going to captivate on. And it doesn't matter what your intent is. It doesn't matter what the impact you can offer them is. If you're not careful about that language, it can really be harmful to developing that relationship. And that, again, it doesn't always come out as ego of like pride, we're tech transfer and we know best. It can truly come out and you are meaning well, but you said just, and I've seen it so many times just immediately ruin the fun.
Just.
Yeah.
But immediately ruining a relationship, that's not a just, right? So
so talking about successes, and actually I'll start with you, Dr. Wright. Could you share a story or just an example of a social innovation and its return on impact? I should say, not return on investment.
So I'll tell you, my favorite one, I think, would be almost categorized as like low level, right? But it's the story behind it, and it actually speaks to this pride and bias piece. And I'm going to be very transparent about where I had some of my own. In starting a new relationship with our extension office in 4-H, I was connected with some folks. They had already found a publisher. They had written a book on giant group games. And this was evidence-backed, best practice on essentially how to do icebreakers with large groups, right? From their experience in 4-H. You all, there is nothing I hate more than an icebreaker. Like, I cannot, any team meeting and they're like, we're going to warm up with an icebreaker, I'm immediately out. Like, mentally, I've checked out. I already hate the day. If it's a full day staff meeting, I'm frustrated the whole day. I hate an icebreaker. And so when they brought this to me, I was like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding. Like, what am I going to do with this? I don't even want to do it. Like, I don't like it. I don't want to do it. They were so great. The people who had built this were so wonderful that I didn't care anymore what the innovation was, right? Like, I just learned to love them so much and working with them so much. I forgot what the deal was we were actually working on. I just really wasn't paying attention to it. And this book has become the #1 best-selling book. We have a #1 bestseller on giant group games. Wow. And it is killing it. And that I I tell them all the time, you all, I didn't want to do this. And they're like, we know, maybe you should quit telling people that. I'm like, I probably should. I should probably quit telling people that. But I think is it our biggest money maker? No, it's not, right? That actually lives in a child welfare platform. And it's an evaluation tool that supports children and families from a mass customization perspective. So it's much more intentional on the child and the family. That one's the moneymaker. But from a philosophical lens and from a principle lens of what we're trying to demonstrate here in terms of how and why you should build social innovation on your campus, this is it. I didn't want to do it. I had my own bias. I never thought that field was going to play in here. And to my point of like, part of my answer to one of your questions earlier, Quentin, was you can't afford not to. We can't afford not to include them, right? And we couldn't afford not to think about it. And it has been wildly successful. It is a national bestseller. And I couldn't be more shocked by anything else. And I just think it's such a beautiful representation from start to finish. I probably shouldn't be so honest and transparent about it, but it is wonderful. And it has high impact, right? Which is why it's a #1 bestseller, which is ultimately what we want to do. It's high impact. It's evidence-based. It's backed by years of best practice, by experts who lead in human interaction and human engagement. And it is everything that the core of social innovation is supposed to be. But because of how I felt about the content, I was really like, and I had to get over myself in order for it to go. And it's beautiful and it's wonderful.
That's great. And I have to ask, all right, before Jordana, you give your answer, have you found any icebreakers you like now?
No.
All
No, but I am more, what I have come to realize, it's not the icebreaker itself, it's how it was facilitated, right? And that's what caused me to not like it. So I tell everybody about the book because in reading through it, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. I know that icebreaker. No wonder I hated it. It wasn't done well. This is how it was supposed to be done, right? And so I talk about it all the time, especially for corporate leadership, as a side hustle, do some work in industry. And I talked to him about it. Like, you are actively creating divisions by not thinking and not investing the time in the silly team building activity that you're wanting to do at the beginning. It's super cheap on Amazon. You can go get it. Here it is. Do it right. Do it well. And it'll be the best investment that you ever make, and it'll pay off astronomically. And that is truly what we're seeing. Right. And thank you for asking that question, because that's really the core of it. It was never about the icebreaker for me. It was about how it was facilitated. And I didn't know that until I worked through this with this team. And now I'm the biggest fan. I talk about it everywhere I can. Huge champion, not just for people who work in community engaged activities, but also for corporate partners and friends. Giant Group Games. Buy it on Amazon now.
Awesome. Big fan. And Jordana?
There's a lot of examples that I really love, but I'm going to share two very briefly because I think they articulate particular aspects of some of the messages that we've talked about earlier. So the first is Living Works, and folks who know me know I've talked about this story quite a bit. This was a collaboration out of the medical school and social work, and it has been around since the early 90s. So the University of Calgary spun it out in the early 90s. At the time, UTI Limited Partnership, and I've worked with Richard Ramsey in subsequent years, they capped their royalties at the repayment of the loan. And so fast forward, we're at 2025 now. This company is still the global gold standard for suicide prevention training. And it's highly impactful, direct lives saved, thousands and thousands of people trained across multiple different countries. But the tech transfer office perspective on this was, it's just Serenity. It does have social impact. But we never saw it through the lens of potentially being a really viable company. And so I think that's an interesting story because it shows that we can see these things as both potential for impact and traditionally aligning to tech transfer office metrics. So we're not necessarily having to do something different all the time. And the last thing I think is really important about the Living Works example is, one, it's an example of social entrepreneurship, but it's also an example of something else that faculty engage in, which I like to call systems entrepreneurship. So they sold a product that directly benefited folks who are experiencing suicide, but they also worked at a system level with governments to shift policy in order to make the infrastructure for people who are thinking about or contemplating suicide more beneficial in those jurisdictions. So there are ways that faculty like to work, which is sometimes about selling a product and service. And sometimes it's also about shifting some of the infrastructure or shifting at a systems level, how we resolve a social problem. So I think that's a little bit harder for tech transfer offices to grapple with. But when we think about the possibility of what universities can be doing to drive impact, I think that's a really important example. And then the second one I want to share, just because it's really small, and it's a different form of success. So we worked with Dr. Katrina Milani. Her expertise is around folks who are experiencing homelessness. And she had noticed that within the Calgary community, the social services and the types of programs that those agencies were delivering hadn't kept up with the research. And in fact, the face of homelessness had changed in Calgary such that it was no longer primarily single males, primarily white and Indigenous. There were actually lots of newcomer families, single women with young families, but the types of resources, say like one apartment bachelor living, that hadn't shifted. And so she said, okay, well, what's going on here? Do we need to enact sort of a research to policy kind of initiative so that we can start to work with community partners so that they can better understand cutting edge research in the community? And in working with her, we thought, okay, well, you're a researcher, so you're going to want to do a research to policy hub. We get it, but does community want this? And so we plugged her into our social enterprise accelerator program. And we had her work with a student on design thinking. And through that process, so, her existing resources, we already had them, but we were able to leverage them to support this faculty member who wasn't thinking about starting a social enterprise. She just wanted to validate that this idea had legs. And in fact, after 30 or some customer discovery interviews, stakeholder engagement, she was able to collect all the data she needed to make a really robust case for this research to policy hub. And in fact, community did want it, and it ended up getting institutional funding from her institute to hire 2 staff to be able to operationalize it. So, it ended up developing that sustainability to allow the initiative to continue, at least in the medium term. And so that for us was success, even though it wasn't a spin out created, it wasn't a license, but it was research that was benefiting community, and it did have this sustainability in order to achieve impact in the coming years. So just different ways that we can think about success if we open up our perspective around what success looks like and how we can measure it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd never even heard of the term systems entrepreneurship, but I love it now. So that's great. So I know we're winding down on time. This is the last question, although who knows, maybe I'll follow up with another question because this has just been so good. And I feel like I could ask you so many more questions as well. But this time I'll start with you, Jordana. If a VPR, Vice President of Research at an institution, is listening to this right now and they want it to begin moving in this direction, what's one practical step that they could take in the next month to start moving that direction?
I think one thing that's really important, and I'll speak to why I wouldn't normally answer this question this way, but I think communicating the value and recommunicating the value of this work, the alignment of this work to the strategic plan, and empowering department heads and college deans and faculty deans to really build confidence in faculties that don't traditionally engage in innovation, that this work is valued and this work is acceptable. So a lot of times when I'm working with a researcher who might be in humanities or arts or a department that doesn't typically engage in the formal innovation processes, I get questions from them like, well, I tried to submit this grant, but we got pushback from our grant team because it has this commercialization aspect to it. Like, does the university want me to do this? Meanwhile, when I speak to senior leadership, deans, VPR, they see the alignment. So making sure that you're communicating that so that message gets all the way down to faculty, I think is really important, because for folks to have the confidence to do this work, in particular, if it's not directly aligned to how their department rewards or incentivizes their work, they need to have the confidence that the university is in support of it. And I think from a senior leadership perspective, communicating that and making sure that you repeat that message is an easy first next step that you can take.
Yeah, that's great. And Dr. Wright?
Yeah, so I think I'll just take Jordana's suggestion, and then, because I 100% support it, and then maybe come down to specific. So if they're going to agree to do this and they're going to start communicating a message out, then what? What does that mean? And I'm gonna call it name and claim. It was an initiative that we did in my very first role as a real adult professional, right? Like my first real life job. I was an educator in the public school system, and it was a charge from our principal. And he said, name and claim your children. I want you to know who the children are in your classroom, and I want you to be able to tell me something about them, not just their name, not just their academic information. Tell me something about them as people. I would say the same thing would apply to Jordana's suggestion. Name the person that they can talk to, right? Innovation is important. Go see Quentin in this office, right? Jordana, your work is amazing. Here's why I think it is so valuable. Would love to see what you could do with next steps, right? Name the human and claim where they're supposed to go with that, and proclaim it, right? And exclaim it and get it out, move it to the next step, right? And that's how we shift from support, which is step one. Absolutely, step one is in that loud, overt, clear communication that this is absolutely necessary and we can't afford not to do it. Our communities, from a sustainable community perspective, can't afford to not be thinking about this, right? And here's how we're going to do that. And call them out by name. So, and then they feel valued. They know you see them. They know you see their research. They know you find that important. But then name a human where they can go and get the help, right? I think often as institutions, I know often as institutions, we're like, well, that resource is here. Go figure it out. Okay, well, 3 emails later, when nobody's responded to me, I've given up on this critical initiative. So name it, right? Name the person, name the researcher, name the value, right? That's what Jordana is saying. Name the value. Say it has impactful meaning, but then tell them where they can go and just help them get past that first next step of, okay, well, now what? Right? And from Jordana and I are both systems people. And I think that's the biggest piece about systems change, is really being honest and thinking through, now what? And not now what from like 3 steps, 5 steps down the road. Yes, but from an implementation perspective, as a systems change person, you need the now what at step 1, right? And then once you build that infrastructure, then you need the now what at step 1 again, right? And then once that gets embedded, now what at step 1 again, and suddenly you're 3 steps down the road. But all we did was, Jordana gave you step 1. Say it out loud. Tell them it's important. Be clear about it. Be overt about it. Be constant about it. Now, what's step 1 again? Step 1 is then now tell them where to go, right? And then those people will do the work if you just help them with the partnership. So I agree. What's a practical step they can do? Jordana gave you the perfect step 1. I'll give you step 1 again.
I love it.
This has been great. Like I said, I feel like I could ask you both of you so many more questions about the work you're doing and being able to bring this into universities across the country, across the world. But we're at the end of time, so I'm going to stop here and just say thank you very much, Jordana and Serenity. Thank you both for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin.
To all the listeners out there, we've been talking with Jordana Armstrong and Dr. Serenity Wright about social innovation. A couple of takeaways for me also are, well, actually just what you said. You want to get started, empower your team, make it clear what they can do, And then, name and claim it, like, and tell them where to go. Like, what's that? Like, let them know, give them that next step to be able to do it. It is important when bringing this in to listen to your people. Be careful with your words. A copyright is not just a copyright. And yeah, don't discount social innovation. In a lot of cases, you can't afford to not do social innovation. So thank you everyone for tuning in. To learn more about Gartner Innovation Search Partners, visit gardnerisp.com, and we'll talk to you later.